I just want to start off this video by saying I understand the plight of the writer. I understand the fact that when you create something, when people criticize very nitpicky details, it's extremely annoying. And it's very pretentious of critics to say that they could have written something better or that they would have done a better job, because you can't say that without actually doing it. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the right to criticize you. And criticism is inevitable, especially when you're dealing with something like Game of Thrones. Because Game of Thrones isn't originally written by those directors and writers of the show. It's written by George R.R. Martin. And when you're tasked with the job of finishing out the story that George created, I can understand how that's a huge endeavor. But also, the framework is there. And this is where most of the online criticism that I actually agree with comes from, is the fact that there are many contradictions in the actual show and the books that just blow apart all of the new developments in the new seasons. Here's an example. Varys doesn't say shit about the fact that he and Dany talked about how he was supposed to tell her when she's being a tyrant.
If he dislikes one monarch, he conspires to crown the next one. What kind of a servant is that?
The kind the realm needs. Incompetence should not be rewarded with blind loyalty. As long as I have my eyes, I'll use them. You wish to know where my true loyalties lie? Not with any king or queen, but with the people. The people who suffer under despots and prosper under just rule. The people whose hearts you aim to win.
Swear this to me, Varys. If you ever think I'm failing the people, you won't conspire behind my back. You'll look me in the eye as you have done today, and you'll tell me how I'm failing them.
Even when he's about to be inevitably burned alive, he doesn't say anything. And this was a conversation that happened last season. It wasn't even in like season 3 or season 4. It was something that they wrote for the new ending of the show that they were creating. Rewatching season 7 just makes me sad knowing what actually happens in the end, because they set up all these cool conversations in these scenes and then they never play them out in season 8. Varys just gets burnt alive by a dragon rather than actually having that face-to-face conversation or even mentioning that he failed to do so.
Look how they massacred my boy.
And the show actually gives you a pretty good feeling as a viewer of how Varys feels, because you get no context of how or why Daenerys is just going all fucking nutso. And where there's supposed to be context, it just feels like a fever dream because they do it so poorly. Her friend gets her head chopped off, but then they just teleport back to Dragonstone rather than having that be the beginning of the siege. Like, why does it all feel so weird? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Did Cersei just let you walk away when she could have ended the war right there and murdered all of you, when that's actually a totally believable thing she would do? And the answer is, yes, it is pointless, so we're back in Dragonstone to watch your favorite character get murdered. And he doesn't even get killed in a normal Game of Thrones way where you actually care that he died, because for some reason he just feels like a lobotomite or some zombie that took over his body and now doesn't actually think. They seem to never completely commit to one narrative or the other. If they were going to go down the evil Dany train, they should have had a little bit more character development, and then they could have still had the shocking reveal of her genociding an entire population of a city. But I can only suspend my disbelief so much. You can't just have her be a completely nice person up until the point that she destroys an entire city. It's just such a blatant attempt to fake us out and shock us that it comes off as comical and laughable. And I know this is also more on the technical nitpicky side, but she should have just charged Cersei. Why didn't she do that? She went for the women and children first. Those people that are now just statues of crispiness in the middle of the road were the generations that she was going on about freeing in the last episode. Like, what the fuck happened in between there and here to have this happen? The only explanation they give is this stupid thing about how she didn't blink when her brother died or some shit, even though her brother threatened to just have her raped if that could make him king. Statements like that don't draw a lot of sympathy from people. I don't know, that's just me. But it all just shows these weird character contradictions where they just forget about conversations in the past or just forget what a character's motives or morals even were. And the arc that she becomes the Mad Queen actually would have been kind of interesting, and people would have enjoyed that story, but they just handled it so poorly. If there was some catalyst that made her do this, I would have liked to see that. That's why I watched the show. And they don't even commit to the doom and gloom that they created. They literally just genocided an entire population, but the next day, they're fine and they have a little sunny get-together. Actually, sorry, it's not the next day, but time is irrelevant in this show and they don't give me a title card, so I don't know what's happening and when. It might have just been a year, who knows. Small nitpick, in the cute little scene that they have in the Hand of the King room, why the fuck do they make Bran, the new broken king, walk all the way up those stairs in his wheelchair? So poor Brienne and Pod have to carry him up those stairs every single time they have a meeting, when they have a perfectly good meeting room downstairs that Robert used because he was lazy. The Unsullied do nothing about their queen being murdered. The Dothraki don't do anything about their queen being murdered. The dragon doesn't do anything about their queen being murdered. And everything just moves on. It's barely even like forgiveness, it's just forgetfulness. If Grey Worm actually had no problem with what just happened to King's Landing, then why does he just give up so easily? And if he actually forgives them and realizes that his queen went too far, why doesn't he say anything about it? He just does what everybody else in the show does and fucks off to somewhere else. Seasons 7 through 8 just feel like an amateur's attempt at creating a Game of Thrones story, because it's a lot of characters trying to go places and running around, but never actually stopping to think about things or show us why they're doing things. And I did the same thing. When I was in video production, all I got caught up with was all the action and motion and everything, and then I forgot about how to actually create a story. I genuinely have to try hard nowadays to create some story around what I do, or I just get caught up in all the VFX and fancy things what I can do with a camera. And these guys are actually really good cinematographers and directors, and I don't think that they are bad movie makers. I just think that they messed up with this season. And for some reason I feel like I had to say something on the topic, because there seems to be this split of people that say, well, if you don't like it, well, you know, you can't complain about it. It just happened. It's how they wanted it. It's original piece. And to those people I say, I'm sorry, that's just a pretentious thing to say, that people can't land criticism on things they thoroughly have enjoyed, especially when it's canon now. Like, this crappiness is canon. People don't like that. It's like Star Wars. But then, like Star Wars, you also have the people that take it way too seriously when it goes wrong. Because a lot of times, what is wrong is pretty subjective. Like, a lot of people didn't like the church stuff in seasons 4 through 5, but I thought it was pretty realistic for medieval times that a church could do that, and it was kind of cool. They also had a really good actor and really good writing, and his motives seemed pretty reasonable. So it's not like the show's creators definitely have no reason to say the things they've said about people critiquing their work. Though in the long run, they definitely took the Star Wars approach and I think tried to subvert people's expectations a little bit too much for this season. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that nothing we say is going to change the show. It exists as it does, and all we can do is review it in its current state. And I think 5-hour nitpick videos are probably the wrong way to go about it. I mean, they're entertaining as hell, but still. I mean, there are hundreds of different things that I could keep going on about season 7 and season 8 that just don't make sense in line with the actual show. But when you start fine-combing through everything and looking for all the tiny little details that they messed up, it becomes just an exercise of rage at that point. In general, I just think this season was a mess. I just think that it was out of order. The story they wanted to tell could have been told if they had just done things in a different order. If they had done the whole Cersei stuff first and then dealt with the Night King, I think it would have been a little bit easier to manage, but, you know, can't really go back now. Like, it just makes sense that the literal fight for humanity's survival would be last. But they kind of had to deal with it because they shot themselves in the foot in season 7 with the wall falling down that early. In conclusion, the show has always been built upon interesting characters doing interesting things in a realistic fantasy world. Now it's just overpowered, uninteresting cardboard characters doing very stupid things that go against all of their character traits, on top of going against every law of reality that they've had in the show beforehand. So, that being said, I would like to thank you for watching this review, and I hope it was helpful and not too scattered, but I just tried to rant about the things that really annoyed me about the ending of the season and the climax of it all, because it really just made no sense. This is actually an interview from a long time ago, but I actually find it pretty relevant to what just happened, because it feels like the lessons that they're describing in this interview they just completely forgot about. So I'll leave you with this awful clip.
The characters felt like real people who just happened to live in a world where these supernatural things existed, and you know, there's something about I don't think there's any way I could have stuck with that many thousands of pages. I know there's no way. If I hadn't fallen in love with the characters, because that's ultimately what compels me about any good story, is that I become, you know, whether or not they're good people, it's not necessarily loving them in the way that you love a friend, but finding them incredibly compelling and just wanting to know what's going to happen to them. I mean, that's sort of the key to any good writing, I think.